What does a retrograde planet mean in your birth chart? So this is a video request I've gotten for quite a long time, and since I am spending a bit more time taking requests lately, as we are all staying in a bit more right now, I thought it would be a great time to start making some videos that have been wanted for a long time, and this is one that I get requests for very often. What does this retrograde planet mean in my birth chart? So this video is just going to be targeted towards birth charts. Perhaps I will make a video about what transit retrogrades mean as well, but this one's just going to be about birth chart planet retrogrades. So there are quite a few interpretations of what a retrograde can mean, and they are all quite accurate, and just depending on the rest of the chart, as an astrologer myself, I will tend to make a bit of a judgment call about how I feel that one person's retrograde planet is sort of acting for them and what things it's bringing up into their life. I tend to kind of look at retrogrades in a similar way to reversals in tarot. It's kind of like the energy acting in a bit of an opposite way, or about the general archetype of the planet coming in roundabout ways. It's not just that, but there's always typically a degree, for example, with, say, having Mercury retrograde in the birth chart, there's always going to be some amount of, intellectual capacity coming in roundabout ways. Intelligence or academics or education may come in roundabout ways. For example, someone with Mercury retrograde in the birth chart may find their sense of intellectual capacity is gained in a chapter of life where you wouldn't necessarily expect. So maybe they don't feel that they became intelligent at school. Maybe they feel that they became intelligent when they were in a relationship or something. It's usually just a roundabout way of experiencing, in this case, Mercury energy. Another interpretation of retrogrades in the birth chart is, and this is kind of a fun one to think about, is that it's something that you really struggled with in a past life. So again, taking Mercury retrograde, perhaps there was a lot of struggle with mental clarity. Perhaps there was a lot of struggle with, acceptance or communication in a past life. Perhaps you really struggled to communicate with your loved ones or something, or really struggled to understand the reality of something. So it's almost like you reincarnate in this life with Mercury retrograde in the birth chart to fix that problem, to fix those issues of communication. Because for me, what a retrograde means always is a focus area. Okay, there's a struggle in this archetype represented by this planet, and therefore a lot of the lessons coming in the karmic path will revolve around this archetype and making it right. There's also usually a sense of frustration around the archetype of the planet that is retrograde. So if you've got a Saturn retrograde, you're going to kind of feel a lot of frustration around themes of structure and organization and authority to a degree. There's going to be a sense of, that's just really overwhelming to me. There's an overwhelm and a frustration also with retrogrades. And, most people do have a retrograde somewhere in their chart. There are times, however, where all planets are in direct motion. So there are a few individuals who will have a birth chart void of retrogrades with no retrogrades. But that is quite rare. And for those people, there is a really benevolent sense of good luck. People who have planets all in direct motion, of course, can still have struggles and can still have other tense configurations in their chart that might bring them difficulties. But there's a tendency with individuals with all direct planets to really be able to move through and find good luck and good fortune. So very fortunate to not have any retrogrades. Although there can be also quite fortunate retrogrades depending on how you want to look at things. If we're the optimistic type, we can look at a retrograde as an opportunity to really fix the issues regarding that planet. So again, Mercury retrograde in the birth chart, it's like here's a great opportunity to really forge a sense of intelligence, a sense of intellectual capacity, a sense of strong communication with people around you. There's an opportunity to make that your best aspect as well, if you would like. Now, I will say a lot of people tend to run and hide from their retrogrades. that is very common, and it's something that I will really work with people one-on-one if I'm doing astrology one-on-one sessions. I'll really work with people to help them not run from their retrogrades and to face them head on and to start building from those retrogrades, because they can really offer so much lightness if they are not escaped from, or if they're not run from. So if you're looking at your birth chart, you might want to look towards your retrogrades and think, am I running from that? Am I running from that energy? Okay, am I running from that experience? Am I not willing to face what that might represent? And you can see there a really easy and great opportunity to grow as a person when you start to focus on your retrogrades and look them, square in the eye. The last thing that I'll say about the theme of retrograde before I get into the planets is that it can also represent a bit of illusion as well. And why is that? That's because retrograde in and of itself, the astronomical term, is an optical illusion. So what happens when you have a retrograde is the planet is not actually moving backwards. That's what it looks like from the position of Earth. If we were to look through a telescope, it would appear that, for example, Mercury or Venus, if it went retrograde, is like it's moving on its orbit and then it starts to move backwards. But that's just because Earth is catching up to them in the ecliptic and on the plane. And as Earth starts to catch up and passes, it's like when you're on an interstate, if you're passing a semi-truck and you're driving past them and all of a sudden it looks like the semi-truck's going in reverse as you're passing the semi-truck. That's exactly what retrograde is. It's that optical illusion that it's moving backwards just because you've passed it. So Earth is passing the planet that's retrograde, and it appears that the planet's moving backwards. So it's an optical illusion at the end of the day. But of course it has so many implications, especially if you're born during a time where that illusion is taking place. It's like it injects a sense of seeing the world in a different way and seeing the world through a different lens, but it is an illusion. So you have to also remember, if you have a retrograde planet in your birth chart, that there might be some degree of thinking the semi-truck is moving in reverse when you're actually just passing it. So sometimes there are wake-up calls for people with a lot of retrogrades, for example, a lot of harsh wake-up calls, a lot of suddenly coming to a realization about things, and that's so important for them. Because you want to sort of see things directly. You want to strive for directness if you have, for example, 3 or more retrogrades in your birth chart, because those people who have a lot of retrogrades can actually struggle with, mental and emotional illness, disillusionment, delusional behavior, and it depends on other configurations, but a lot of retrogrades will make somebody really see the world differently. And that's not necessarily ill, especially if those people have, a well-placed Mercury or a well-placed, configuration that, like in Virgo or a 6th house injection, that could really make them see things really clearly. But if you have a lot of retrogrades, just bear in mind that sometimes you gotta wake up to things, and that's something that everybody has to go through, even if they don't have all these retrogrades. But specifically, a retrograde full person will need to just kind of get their head out of the clouds and see things for what they are and move through life and make decisions based on truth, based on things that have actually happened. You want to watch out, as someone with a lot of retrogrades, for making split decisions or making really, really emotional decisions without thinking too much. You want to sleep on things. You don't want to move too quickly because, for example, it's almost like if you were to change lanes while the semi-truck, while you're passing it and while it's going in reverse, there could be confusion there. You want to get ahead of it before you're changing lanes. And that's the best that I can really describe any retrograde, Mercury retrograde, Venus retrograde, whatever, is that you want to make sure that you're clearing the traffic before you're making a lot of, traffic changes. The best comparison, I think, is traffic. Like if you're in a packed interstate, you don't want to be changing lanes all the time. You don't want to be one of those crazy people with road rage, swerving around people and veering around people. because that's sort of like the energy of making split decisions with lots of retrogrades. You've got to get ahead and clear things out before you're making a super huge amount of important decisions, okay? And then you'll be able to navigate fine, you know? But yeah, let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to go quickly through each individual planet retrograde and some of their meanings in a birth chart. So I already made quite a few examples of Mercury retrograde, but let's talk a little bit about what else it can mean in the birth chart. So a lot of people might think that this could indicate mental slowness or even learning disabilities, and it can, you know, especially if it is like conjunct a Uranus retrograde, or if Mercury is placed in like Sagittarius or Pisces in retrograde. There can be like ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, things like that can, or even vision problems like not being able to read well because of vision issues. That can happen, but more likely is a mind that's too quick. When Mercury turns retrograde, it gets stressed out because it's the fastest moving planet in our solar system. So the retrograde cycle slows it down, and as we see it from Earth, it seems to like move a lot slower than it is accustomed to, as do all of the planets when they're retrograde. But Mercury specifically has a hard time with this because it's the quickest moving. So to be slowed down, you know, symbolically means more for Mercury than like Pluto, for example, because Pluto already moves so slowly. And that's just my opinion, but I think that Mercury retrograde in the birth chart natally can show that people also think too quickly, and there's a lot, if you can imagine a squirrel, because Mercury rules squirrels, and you know how they kind of dart around. Anybody who like drives and say a squirrel runs out in front of your car, it'll like run out in front of the car, then it'll dart back, then it'll dart back the other way, and it makes it a lot harder to dodge the squirrel because it didn't just run across the road. There's a lot of that with Mercury retrograde in the birth chart, like indecisiveness, running across the road, then deciding to run back across the road, then running back, like darting back and forth is basically the energy of Mercury retrograde in the birth chart. So if you have this placement, it's important to keep things pretty linear. If you're going to choose to cross the road and get to the end of the road. Try to watch out for breaking with the path, or breaking and darting back and forth on decisions, choosing to accept something, then right as you've accepted it, choosing to go back on it, going back on your word, even teasing others without realizing it, or showing a lot of emotions to other people. When I say emotions, I mean like being really, really friendly to somebody, then being a bit standoffish, and sort of darting back and forth in your output of feelings towards other people. That can also happen with Mercury retrograde in the birth chart. It can also, again, it's very ADD. That's really the main thing, and it depends on what sign it's placed in. It's like social media. Social media is a good example of Mercury retrograde energy. You know, there's so many different things. Your mind jumps into so many different spaces. You even like open up YouTube and there's so many different videos, and you have to process that all at once. And that's not quite possible. So this is like the energy of Mercury retrograde. There's so many stimulus to process, and it's not possible, so you just end up choosing one. But what's happened to all of that unprocessed stimulus? Does that just go into your psyche? How do you then let go of that? Mercury retrograde in the birth chart deals with these processes and with these things. But there's a really great opportunity for Mercury retrograde individuals to continue to pursue higher levels of intelligence, especially later in life. So I see a lot of Mercury retrograde individuals who end up, you know, going for their master's degree or going for their doctorate degree, or working in some kind of field that requires a lot of mental you know, focus and exercise, you know, working a very high-paying job even. I actually do look at Mercury retrograde in the birth chart to indicate some degree of wealth. It depends on the placement. You know, it needs to have something like a 10th house Saturn aspecting it or with it to really do that. But I tend to see that these people are actually do quite well with money, and they actually don't spend it well. They will struggle with budgeting to a degree, but they can make it, and they can actually face this karmic path and become very mentally dexterous and capable. But it does take effort, and for some people, therapy as well, or regimens of even something for like ADD or some type of medicine for things like that. And I think that you have to watch out also for any type of like prescriptions. Again, I'm not a doctor, but you want to find more natural remedies and even mental exercises. So playing an instrument, learning to play the piano, learning to play something that's focused, like how to read music and play a song all the way through by reading music and playing the song, like mental exercises like that, even math, algebra, trigonometry, whatever. These are really good exercises for someone with Mercury retrograde in the birth chart, because it needs to start something and finish something. No darting back and forth, okay? And that's how you heal broken Mercury energy. Okay, Venus retrograde in the birth chart. So yeah, Venus retrograde, it's a tough one. Probably one of the toughest planets to have retrograde, even more so than the outer planets, because the outer planets retrograde, it happens so frequently that, it just, if so many people have them. Venus retrograde obviously shows a bit of pain in relationships, sexual trauma, sexual difficulties, sexual illusion as well, not being sure of what sexuality is to yourself, wielding a lot of that type of energy without knowing how to channel it is usually indicated by Venus retrograde. So similar to Mars retrograde, Venus retrograde deals with wielding a lot of life force energy and not really knowing what to do with that. So it can kind of implode on itself. And Venus retrograde, the first thing that I think of when I see it is we're not giving ourselves a lot of comfort. We're not giving ourselves what we really want, okay? There's a degree, and this is also similar with Saturn retrograde, of not really ever giving yourself what you truly want. At the same time, it can be the polar opposite, and it can be hyper indulgent too, and really not want to work, really not want to do the things it needs to do. It can get very upset for having to do anything that's menial or challenging or not fun or not relaxing, because Venus is about relaxation and comfort. So either it will never give itself relaxation and comfort, or it will never deny itself relaxation and comfort. There's not a lot of in between. But that's the way that you heal this Venus placement, is by the acceptance of in-between scenarios. So Venus is all about feelings and reactions and our status as individuals, like our emotional status, but also our wealth status and things like that too. So we have to understand with Venus retrograde that there is an ebb and flow of status, and when a Venus retrograde can kind of fall into a routine and allow itself to do things that are not comfortable, knowing that it's going to help them, they will get a lot better. And when they can also then give themselves comfort and reward themselves for hard work, they have to be able to do both, and then they will just really start to find better relationships. And Venus retrograde can also indicate divorce or marriages that go on too long. There's an issue with the theme of marriage for sure, but it depends on what else is placed there. Just as a Venus retrograde, you want to really give yourself some amount of freedom and give yourself some amount of adaptability in life. You don't want to get too stuck with things, okay? Mars retrograde, let's talk about Mars retrograde. So I think that Mars retrograde is a tough one. That's because it's really tough for the individuals with this placement to release and to let things go. Mars deals with the penultimate masculine energy of release. So Mars retrograde says that there's a bit of a pent-up energy, or there's a blockage, or there's something inhibiting the ability to release. So there can even be like endocrine issues. There can be like a difficulty sweating, or a difficulty releasing toxins, like kidney problems or bladder problems, or like constipation, digestive problems, anything that deals with lack of release. So there's a lot of focus for somebody with this placement in healing that. And perhaps in counseling and therapy, it's such a great placement for counseling, therapy, or spiritual work. So if you've got Mars retrograde, maybe you should reach out for a reading when I'm offering them again, because it's a really simple one to heal as well. It's a placement that can really actually become very connected to self-healing and self-help and self-empowerment, because Mars is a very changing energy. You know, it's the natural ruler of Aries and Scorpio, so it deals with pioneering transformation, and the retrograde specifically inhibits that. It's like it turns it inward, or it turns it, it kind of blunts that sharpness. So Mars retrograde, it can also really repress things or bottle things up, and then it can have explosions of temper. So through repressing and through bottling up, there's an explosion that becomes inevitable. It's like a volcano. Like if you can imagine a blocked volcano, and it's like that whole section of the earth just like explodes because of the blockage. That is the energy of Mars retrograde. There can also be issues with children. So if you're a parent, or if you're, even a grandparent, there can be sort of a difficulty with relationship with your children or with your younger generations if there's not been an ability later in life to solve this problem of that sort of pioneering bluntedness, I'll call it. There can be your children will probably be loyal to you, and they'll probably, I wouldn't say that you would deal with estrangement unless there's other placements, but there can just be a tense relationship with children, and also a tense relationship with men in general. Okay, and a tense relationship with masculine figures in your life. It can also be prone to bullying too. Usually being bullied as the Mars retrograde person, but perhaps some of them could even be a bit of a bully. Again, that's not going to be all of them, but they really do tend towards being picked on and towards other people bullying them, or talking bad about them, or doing something or making them embarrassed. It deals a lot with humiliation, okay? So we want to really heal old problems with humiliation as a Mars retrograde, and we want to step into our power and start exercising more, okay? Watch out for overeating. Watch out for not exercising, because you got a lot of energy to channel through sweating and through exercising, and that's one of the best things you can do with this placement, okay? And that's all I'll talk about for Mars retrograde for now. Let's talk about Jupiter retrograde in the birth chart. So this one's kind of funny, and it's one that's really hard to give a standard for, because this comes out so many different ways. Again, Jupiter is our 9th house philosophical sense of luck, sense of prosperity, sense of abundance in our lives. So when it goes retrograde, we can just feel that we have a bit of a black cloud of unluckiness around us. We can feel like a bit of an Eeyore. We can feel like a bit of people are out to get us, or people are out to take things away from us. Also, it can just seem Saturnine as well. So there can be just a Saturnian cloud over these people too. They can seem very Capricorn. They can seem very Saturn ruled. So what you might see with Jupiter retrograde is that you never want to play the lottery, okay? Watch out for gambling money away. Watch out for investing in, perhaps investing in the stock market as if you were rolling the dice, or because Jupiter retrograde also indicates perhaps getting an inheritance, or being given quite a lot of money as a test, okay, to kind of test if you're able to take care of it and if you're able to nurture that. So with Jupiter retrograde, you want to also care for your digestive health. There can be issues with the air in the body, so the lungs, but also the gases throughout the body. There can be an issue there, and also just in the lower digestive tract as well. So you want to take care of those parts of your body. Also, sometimes Jupiter retrograde people, along with Mars retrograde people, this is a similarity between these two retrogrades, they can be too pacifying sometimes. So they can not call people out on things, or they can be kind to a fault. There's a difficulty with Jupiter retrograde to really share anything negative or share anything problematic. And like with all the other retrograde energies, it can swing to the polar opposite. So there can be way too negative. They can be absolutely, completely 100% pessimistic, but there's not usually an in between. Either they are way too optimistic or way too pessimistic. This is not a pragmatic person, typically, Jupiter retrograde. Saturn retrograde. This is a tough one. Saturn retrograde indicates issues with authority. It indicates that we are kind of too pacifying towards ourselves. You know, Jupiter retrograde dealt with not being pacifying enough, and Saturn retrograde deals with being perhaps too pacifying. Also struggling to implement any type of routine, or struggling to implement self-control, struggling to find accountability as well. Saturn is about accountability. So you want to watch out for your bank accounts. You want to watch out for money. Again, this is a placement that represents perhaps getting inheritance, or later in life coming into money. And there can be issues with that. There can be, people trying to get to that, or there can even be like you want to buy a lot of things that don't really have a lot of use, or you want to have a lot of material around you, a lot of like for example, somebody who wants to buy a lot of old cars or something, or old houses that they never then do anything with, and they sit there. There's something with Saturn retrograde about dense material objects just sitting without use. I see that a lot with people with Saturn retrograde, like people who own houses that are never inhabited, or people who, own a lot of cars that are broken down, things like that. And that is just a sign that we're too attached in our mentality, okay? So it's really important for these people to find a way to let go of these material things, and simultaneously let go of some of the old attachments that they have. Saturn retrograde often means that the father figure was a bit traumatic, or a bit frightening, or a bit really loved, and perhaps died early, or something happened to the father figure that has made an attachment, okay? So whether the father figure was someone that we struggled a lot with or really loved, typically after their passing, the Saturn retrograde individual will be very attached to them or what they did in some way. And this will create an attachment to material possessions as a representation of the father energy, or what happened as a result of the father energy. So they have to really make a life's goal of detaching from the father energy, okay? That's what the Saturn retrograde is indicative of. And that's going to come through the release of material objects. And through that release, there's typically a lot of gain in security and stability. So perhaps it's the selling of an old house, or perhaps it's the renovation of that old house and the renting of it out. These are just proverbials, and you can apply that to any other type of material. But there oftentimes really needs to be a transformation relating to the surrounding material items. Okay, let's talk about Uranus retrograde. Uranus retrograde is similar to Mercury retrograde, so you might want to listen to that one as well, because it's the higher octave of Mercury. But Uranus retrograde is oftentimes a bit of a rejection of collective, okay? It's a bit of a rejection of also the current rebellious nature, too. Uranus is the natural ruler of Aquarius, which is the sign of the rebel, and also the sign of the contemporary. So Uranus retrograde, on one hand, it kind of detaches us from the current timeline, so we might sort of be living in a different time, or we might represent what others would consider a different time. And at the same time, we're not the stereotype of that. So for example, you have the person who still dresses like they're living in the 1950s, but they kind of act like someone from the future. It's really hard to place these people, or it's really hard to group a person with Uranus retrograde. And this can be, a blessing or a curse. Sometimes that can be really good for them, but also it's tough for them to find a niche, okay? Uranus is also representative of community and representative of niches. So a Uranus retrograde person will feel a bit singled out, a bit outcast, a bit of an underdog, a bit, withheld or detached, or even, mentally. This can be totally just within. There can be a lot of detachment, a struggle to find an emotional root or an emotional line. This can also represent having a lot of different personality traits. Not necessarily multiple personalities or anything like that, but just having a lot of aspects, a lot of paths that you could follow. So what that creates is just somebody who's very different from the rest of the herd. This placement can also predilect itself towards neurological problems. So just like Mercury retrograde, you want to keep your neurological health high. Having somewhat often doctor's checkups, because Uranus deals a lot with health. It's weird. So especially if it's placed in your 6th house or in an earth house in general, you'll want to really keep an eye on your health, because there can be weird, tough to diagnose things, and you don't want to let that freak you out or anything, but it's like, you know if you're there. So this placement can struggle with, anything that's neurologically unsound. So keep an eye on that. And of course, that's going to have other configurations that offset that. You would want to see like Uranus retrograde placed into the 6th house with like a tough Pluto or Mars configuration to see any type of, horrible neurological problem or anything. But what you will see is that any too much stimulus or too much stress will make you feel a bit faint or make you feel a bit shaky or tremorous, okay? Most Uranus retrograde people don't have a lot of endurance when it comes to situations that are not correct, because what Uranus energy is meant for is to get us out of situations that aren't right for us. It's meant for us to rebel, it's meant for us to revoke, and it's meant for us to rebuke things that aren't right. So when it's retrograde, we can kind of still get attached to things that aren't right for us, and that causes a bit of a health problem. So yeah, let's see. Let's talk about Neptune retrograde now. Neptune retrograde is the higher octave of Venus, so it'll be similar to that, but this will basically actually deal with your psychic ability. Neptune retrograde people are going to be very psychic, but it's going to come in roundabout ways, and it's going to come in unexpected ways. You'll feel very empathetic as a Neptune retrograde person, but you might see that comes at odd times, or you might see that it's like even tough to like shop in crowded places, or tough to be in really big crowds, because you will feel so many people's energy. So it's important for this retrograde to have a lot of solitude. They can also feel a bit nervous and panicky in solitude though too. So it's about being able to acclimate yourself to both, being able to be alone, being able to be in public, being able to have some amount of control over your own empathetic capabilities. And you also want to have, with Neptune retrograde, quite a bit of free time if you can have it. Again, you can see like headaches and neurological problems, kind of like Uranus retrograde, if there's too much like focus all the time. Part of a Neptune retrograde person's path deals with disconnecting from the typical experience. So yeah, they'll have a lot of time in kind of odd scenarios or odd things that most people can't really relate to. Also, watch out for substances too. This can struggle with addiction. It can struggle with needing to escape the body, needing to escape reality as well. And also, it sees that through addiction, it doesn't really do it. Neptune retrograde says that the typical ways of escaping reality do not work, and there's a blockage there. Nonetheless, they can try a lot. So you want to really just cross substance out of your mind. Even things like plant medicine or psychedelics or things that are like new agey, you want to cross that out of your mind for the most part as a Neptune retrograde person, because what might be healing to other people, or what many other people might do to spiritually cleanse themselves or whatever, is not going to work for a Neptune retrograde person. It's going to be completely found at the level of the self. You might see that that just taking like vitamin D or breathing in lavender essential oil might help you to get away from some of the pain, more so than really tough substances. So definitely think about that. It's a good food for thought for Neptune retrograde. Also, you want to watch out for family dynamics too with Neptune retrograde. You want to kind of keep your family, I don't want to say at arm's length, but you want to watch out for being dependent on the family. There's an issue for Neptune retrograde with having family dependencies, so watch out for that. Okay, Pluto retrograde. This is an interesting one. Pluto retrograde, it means that when you need to transform, or when you need to have a huge change in life, that might get put on hold, or that might be blocked, okay? There's a struggle for transformation, and there is a frustration around the theme of transformation, and also the theme of hidden things. So esoteric knowledge, or things that we try to hide in life, might not be hidden, okay? So this is like the energy of secrets being told, or taboos coming to light, or the attempt to hide something, or the attempt to cover something up just to be, that much more clarified, is seen in the Pluto retrograde archetype. So the most important thing for an individual with this placement is to strive towards cleanliness and to strive towards a life that is not taboo and not hidden and not too risky. Okay, you want to avoid risk with this sign. Anything that's defying legality or defying anything that is common in society, you just got to kind of watch out for. It's not to say that Pluto retrograde can't hide things. They can, and they can do it for years and years, but it might, get an episode of 60 Minutes devoted to it a few generations down, That's just a joke, but you want to just kind of keep things clean with Pluto retrograde, because what it does offer is this incredible sobering experience of seeing life's directions and momentums. A Pluto retrograde person can learn so much about momentum and energy and healing and spiritual knowledge, and not from the sense that it's hidden or the sense that it's esoteric, but from the sense of being able to relate to delays to a degree, or being able to relate to experiences where they just almost had that transformation, or where they just almost had that, life-changing relationship, and how through that sense of almost, it became that. So what is a great gift as a Pluto retrograde person is the ability to really define your own life, okay? Try to watch out for letting other people define what is or was a transformation for you, or what is or was a good or bad experience for you, because you have a lot of power to do that yourself and really make a lot of choices in life that are yours only. But again, watch out for other people trying to harness that, because what this does really represent is other people having tried to harness your own transformative energy. So perhaps a parent from early on really used your energy to their own advantage. I also see with Pluto retrograde, because Pluto is 8th house energy, it deals with other people's money. A lot of people who are victims of identity theft, or people whose parents took out credit cards in their kids' names, the victims of these things will tend towards Pluto retrograde. Because there is a bit of a victim mentality there, and there's a bit of being stolen from. So you really want to watch out for, sharing your credit card information, sharing your social security number. Anything like that is a big no-no for anyone, but specifically for a Pluto retrograde, because it's more prone to theft, okay? And why is that? It's because there's a karmic issue with taking. There's a karmic issue with what belongs to me. So we've incarnated with Pluto retrograde to learn about how to keep ourselves secure and how to keep ourselves safe from people who take. So that's what you're learning in this lifetime as a Pluto retrograde, is how to keep safe, how to keep stable, how to keep solid. And once you start to get there, there's this incredible ability to feel so empowered as a Pluto retrograde once you are not opening yourself up to risky people. So yeah, you want to really watch out for the con artists of the world, for the criminals, for the dark side of life. You want to kind of just say goodbye to as Pluto retrograde, because what it also does is it kind of just blocks those things out too. There might be a desire as a Pluto retrograde to interact with those worlds, but to a degree that door is locked, and it's such a blessing, okay? These people who might have otherwise found themselves very convicted in life might really just bypass that through having Pluto retrograde, so that's a really good blessing. Also with Pluto retrograde, you want to watch out for injuring yourself, okay? You want to watch out for your health, and you want to watch out for risky situations, because the body does not heal quite as easily as other people. Again, the transformative ability is just a little bit delayed. So a broken bone or a bad illness might take a bit more time to heal than most people. So you just want to keep your mind on that and try to do things the safe and sure way. And that might sound discouraging. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't heal as quickly. But as a Pluto retrograde, your challenge is to see where the advantage is in that. And the advantage for a Pluto retrograde in that delayed healing process is the ability to avoid a horribly painful thing in the first place, okay? Which, an ounce of prevention is worth however million moments of cure. So that's really the power of Pluto retrograde, is there's a lot of prevention there. And to really capitalize on that is your ability to rise above these tough situations. So anyway, that's our last one for today, everyone. I hope that you really liked this video. Be sure to hit the like button if you were able to make it all the way through and listen to all of the retrograde planets. Comment below. Let me know if you have any retrogrades in your birth chart, and let me know what you think of these retrogrades as well. And we will be talking soon. I really enjoyed doing this request, and I hope that you all are enjoying this time. Much love. Bye.